Hello and welcome to another episode of Harlem Stories. Thank you for joining us. And by the way, you know what? If you're listening, you like what you hear, add a like onto the podcast episode, and the more it'll help us find more people that are interested in listening. So please feel free to do so. So today I'm your host. If you haven't heard any of the stories before, I'm Adam Feinberg. I'm here today joined with my co-hosts Denise and Dom. And hello. So we're gonna continue part 2 of understanding how Manhattan market works different in real estate. So it is something that we are just so different on every form of the process. And we're going to talk a little deeper about it. I don't know that we're necessarily going to cover every single point that could be imagined, but I know I've captured a lot of that in our past episode and this episode. So next thing I think we want to kind of kick off with, how Manhattan is different is we have attorneys involved, and attorneys are doing a large process. I have a full episode on it, and I'm sure, going forward, we'll probably bring in an attorney, to discuss, in depth on how our process is different. But just quick overview over here is that the attorneys, they're doing the due diligence, they're doing the sales contracts, they're working with the title companies, so they're doing all these different things. But understanding it, the attorney handles the contracts and all money flows through them, not agents or the title companies, as it's common in other locations. So I know, when I helped my mom downsize not too long ago in Florida, it was the title company that was actually doing the whole process. The due diligence, it was on you. There is no attorney in Florida unless you actually want one. And it's, it's a lot more risk intensive there, but that's also why it's a much faster and cheaper process. So, when comparing our process here in New York, I can tell you, the attorneys, they can make or break a deal, and it's
I've always said that, yeah.
Yeah, and having a good attorney, I think, is a really important part of the process. I like to say, I'm like, I've got a list of questions that a buyer can ask, and an attorney in trying to select one. We're not going to get into that today, but ultimately, what I feel is like one of the key questions that I like to make sure is like, how responsive are they? And what do they look for, and do they explain their process and what they do? They should be able to justify, even though, yes, they're incredibly expensive. A typical attorney is $3,000-$4,000 to start with. And obviously it can get more complicated, especially like our overseas clients and whatnot. But, a good attorney should be able to explain what it is that they do in the process over here. So, that's one component over here.
Can we touch a little bit on due diligence, just a synopsis?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Is that okay?
Yeah, so in terms of like the due diligence process, a lot of times what they're doing over there and reviewing it, they're looking through the offering plan, they're looking through the amendments of the offering plan, they're looking at alterations agreements.
And these are all for the buildings.
And they're all for the building, and they're looking through all these different aspects of the building. They're also creating and a good attorney will do this. Not every attorney will, but all the attorneys that I work with actually do this. They create their own questionnaire for the managing agent.
Correct.
And and sometimes that questionnaire, if there's no like specific concerns, it might be the same questionnaire across the board that they use with all clients, but sometimes the client might have a question over here. Maybe you're buying a penthouse and you're concerned about leaks, which is common in roofs. So maybe you want the attorney to really dig deeper into that roof and the condition of it, and whether there's been complaints or whether there's been conversations within the meeting minutes. So that's another thing that the attorneys are reading through is the meeting minutes of the building. Now, I can tell you in a condo, a lot of times, basically the managing agent might tell the board, and I've gone through this myself, they might tell the board, I'm like, you know what? The meeting minutes really just consist of, we met on such and such day, and these were the people here, and we, voted on this issue, And that's like it.
Yeah.
It's like there's no real
So
substance.
it's-
You know, so so it's really up to a good attorney to really find out what's going on this. Now, also worth going into in that due diligence component is a lot of times, now, this is all case by case, but I can tell you the vast majority of the situations, buyers don't necessarily need to hire an inspector in every situation in Manhattan. The reason being is a lot of what the inspector does will overlap within the attorney's role of doing the due diligence for the building. Because if you think about it, there's two components when you're buying these apartments. There's the interior, or what they call walls in, of the apartment. That's what you're actually purchasing. Since these are all shared building systems and components and whatnot. So anything a building inspector is going to find that's directly relevant with your purchase is going to be inside those walls. Everything else is making sure that your financial investment is kept in check. And that's what the attorney is doing. Now, I've had clients that have done inspections, and we found that they're identically overlapping in the situations between what the inspector found and what the attorney found. And that's when you know that the attorney is doing what they're supposed to be doing, is they're finding the exact same situations that the inspector did. So
yeah, and a lot of times with my clients, they like to get the inspector, and they're really for peace of mind.
Right.
To really kind of double down and kind of have that extra security of the purchase that they're making is the right choice, and to kind of really protect their asset and their purchase.
Absolutely. And I tell most of my clients, I said, listen, depending on what you're buying, you probably don't need an inspection. It's your choice, but at the same time, you probably don't need to spend that money because that's what your attorney is doing. Correct. Now, there are situations where I say, I'm like, oh yeah, you're not moving forward with it without getting an inspection. I'm like, this is the situation. So for instance, townhouses, small condo and co-op buildings where there might not be a managing agent, or maybe there is, but small buildings tend to be handled differently. Yep. If you're buying a penthouse where you might have to deal with the roof, and that might be your responsibility rather than the buildings, depending on what's been done with that roof. Or alternatively, if you found something that just doesn't look or feel right, I always think in those situations, absolutely get an inspection done. I'm not necessarily saying don't get an inspector. It's entirely my buyer's choice, but trust that your attorney, if you're hiring a good one, that they're going to be, addressing at least the overwhelming majority of issues. So, yeah.
And to jump a little bit backwards here, in terms of timeline for due diligence, usually or typically it's anywhere between 5 and 7 days of accepted offer. It varies, but I typically say 5 to 7 days.
So I would love for the vast majority of my deals to be 5 to 7 days. I don't think that is my norm, though.
Okay. What have you seen, really?
Typically, it winds up going into about 3 weeks.
Really?
Yeah. This is a lot. Now, one of the big components of it is usually it's not the attorneys. It's usually the managing agent.
Okay.
So that's usually the sticking point in most instances.
But doesn't this the buyer have 10 days to sign the contract?
Well, first off, it's important to understand that any deadlines in this business are not real deadlines.
They're not real deadlines.
They're more like
guidelines.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, they might say, you've got 10 days to sign. Or if there's a bidding war, that's when there's an actual real timeline. Because it's they can just move on to the next buyer. It doesn't matter whether you got all the answers or not.
Yeah.
I'm you might not be able to get a lot of the answers in the 3 days that is frequent with these bidding wars. Now, at the time we're recording this, there aren't as many bidding wars out there, but
unless you're in Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn, yeah.
Brooklyn right now has been super hot.
On fire.
And I've had a couple situations where I lost out on deals because of bidding wars that we weren't expecting.
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So in Manhattan, we're not seeing it as frequent, but yes, in Brooklyn, you're absolutely correct. I'm actually seeing it take more closer to 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Denise, what about you? What have you?
Yeah, same 5 to 7.
Okay.
That's what I.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I've had unfortunately deals that have gone 4 to 6 weeks in due diligence. and quite a number of them too.
Did you, in the deals that have taken that long, have you gotten pushback from the sellers where they're like, your client is taking too long, we're gonna...
It's kind of like they want to know what's the holdup, and I'm
Correct.
like, and I'm telling them, I'm like, listen, we're trying to get confirmation on this issue. Can you push this?
Correct. Okay.
And they're pushing it, and they're like, they're not getting any traction either.
Got it. So they
Either, right. So now
they-
they know.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
So,
yeah,
yeah, that-
Everyone's on the same page there.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I don't usually have situations where it's like my client is like intentionally holding things
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
It's almost always the managing agent.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, that is kind of like an something that like a buyer coming in, or even the seller, working with a buyer, trying to come with to expect in the Manhattan market.
Correct.
There are managing agents that are really quick.
And on the flip side of this, as if you're working as a seller's agent, make sure you have all of this stuff ready to go before you even list the apartment.
Yeah.
Because that can expedite the process as
Like
well.
what?
Like if you
For our audience sake.
So if you have if you work with an attorney a lot and they give you a questionnaire, you can send that to the managing agent ahead of time and get at least some of they might not answer all of the questions,
right,
but they at least have something already there, that some questions already prepped and ready to go. So you're not, again, waiting for them to find the information and all that ahead of time. Some other things, getting the financials ahead of time, making sure that you have all of that already packaged and ready to go. So when you have an accepted offer, you can send that to the attorneys, so that they have a head start at least. So
No, I like you touching on that,
Yeah.
because our previous sales manager, he was very, very what's the word I'm looking for? Conscientious on getting the financials and working through the financials. So we have the health, the financial health of the building. And I wanted to, and also, as Dom was saying, getting all the disclosure, not disclosures, but the forms, like the alteration agreements, the house rules,
all that.
all of that, the board application, so you can review the board application.
I like to have all this stuff
ready
before I even list.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you guys, do you get the offering plan with the amendments even before when you list?
Yeah, I
yes.
try and get all that before
Yes.
I list.
Some managing agents will ask you to pay for it
Yep.
ahead of time, and some.
We also have a connection, our hookup that has a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
in,
we also
Correct.
and that will give it to us
Oh
for
yes,
free.
yes.
But,
I always email that connection.
Yeah.
And so guys, your audience, again, your broker works on your behalf.
Correct.
Because there's no way that you would know these nuances of what to get
Right.
when you're selling your property.
But even if you're on the buyer side, it's sometimes really good to have the offering plan, because like if you're an agent and we work all throughout the city and whatnot, so we might not know every building out there, and even if we're very knowledgeable in a neighborhood, we might not know every building. So it's sometimes good to read through that offering plan and find out like some of the interesting quirks or differences about the building. So for instance, in a building that I've sold multiple apartments in, I knew through reading through the offering plan after my first deal that like if you're on the 6th floor or below, those apartments only have 8-foot ceilings, but if you're on the 7th floor and above, it's 9-foot ceilings.
And that's important.
Yeah, so
That's very important.
So like now I can go in and talk to any new potential client and say, I'm like, you know what, you guys optimally, you said, I'm like, okay, you already want taller ceilings, so I'm going to recommend if something comes on the market in that building that you ignore the ones with the lower ceilings. And on the lower floors. So these are things that that really highlight the differences of working in Manhattan versus anywhere else. So we're going through these kinds of things, and I know these offering plans, they're often like 400-600 pages, maybe even longer.
They're definitely huge.
But it is really helpful when we can kind of go through all that. All right, I kind of mentioned over here, offers they're not binding. I didn't mention that part, but offers are not binding, so you can technically go from building to building and make multiple offers if you feel that that's important.
Now, why is that important for audience to know that the offers are not binding?
So in some states, and I think
exactly New Jersey,
yeah,
the offers,
and
offers
Florida
are binding.
too.
That's it. Once you make an offer, you're you need to follow.
So does a deposit go with an offer or no?
So in New York,
yeah.
No, I don't know about other states, but I know in New York, no, offer is not binding. You only actually have to put a deposit down once you're actually moving forward and you're signing the contract.
Correct.
That's when when you sign that contract, you put in the deposit, typically 10%. And then that contract is signed and countersigned by both parties and then delivered as fully signed by all parties. Only then are you considered to be in contract and it's now binding.
Yeah, and it's now binding. Yeah, you can't make multiple offers, I think, in New Jersey.
Yeah. And Florida, too.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so different states have different laws with this stuff. But this is the reason why I wanted to kind of point this out.
Because I had a client from New Jersey, and they didn't, well, I don't want to put the offer in here because I know it's binding. I'm like, you can put in 20 offers if you want. You go, really?
Yeah.
Right.
They were so happy. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's go play.
No, it can be fun doing that, but it is a lot of work for us. But that's okay. Like, the reality is we'd rather have the work than not have the work.
Correct.
So, all right. So I kind of mentioned this a little bit before, but I just want to quickly formally cover it. The buyer's attorney due diligence often, but not always, replaces the need for property inspection. And there's various forms of due diligence: building financials, the offering plan amendments, alteration agreement, house rules, building questionnaires, follow-up questions, or any kind of other concerns. So, we always hope that we get this in full. We don't always. As the building gets much older, the offering plan becomes less relevant for the attorney, but I'd still like to have it if at all possible. But a lot of these older co-ops, sometimes the offering plan does get lost, over the years.
Yes,
so we don't always have that. And I've also had deals where there were open questions and we could not get the managing agent to ultimately answer the question. Yes. They kind of felt like it might have put the building management too exposed to any kind of legal questions, so they don't want to answer it, and that will sometimes hold up deals. And we've been able to get around it, and sometimes prices sell lower because of that. They don't want to answer.
You're right with offering plans getting lost, because I was doing a deal on the Upper East Side, and the president of the board didn't have the offering plan. The board couldn't find the offering plan, and of course, our connection. I was able to get the offering plan, and they were like, "Oh," with the amendments. And
right.
I go, "Oh, how did you get this?" I'm like, "Well, that's
got a little trick on my sleeve."
Yeah,
right.
That's why I work in the industry. I'm a professional.
As I see you, you're bridging your arms and cracking the knuckle.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on into the next topic: closing costs. So buying a resale versus a sponsor unit, they're often negotiated a little bit differently. And if you're, there's some closing costs that the sponsor might ask a buyer to pay that are not common anywhere else. The big one that surprises everyone that nobody expects, it's kind of hidden in there, is when the sponsor asks the buyer to pay a contribution toward buying the super's apartment.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, and that could be big bucks. That could be $10,000, $15,000, $20,000.
Yes.
Depending on the building and the size of the apartment. So that's like a hidden cost that nobody else thinks to ask. They're all focused on price.
Yeah.
As agents, we're focused on the total cost and looking for it. So first off, we're going to negotiate a little differently, on a sponsor unit sale than we are going to be with a resale.
Adam, can we just double back a bit? Our audience might not really understand what a resale is or what a sponsor unit is. Could we touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So the resale is when an actual individual owner or individual entity owns the apartment. So it could be, let's say in condos, it might be an LLC, or it could be an individual or a couple, any number of possibilities.
Like you own your apartment.
I own my apartment.
And you're selling it, so that's a resale.
That's a resale.
Yeah.
So a sponsor unit is often either and these terms are almost kind of used interchangeably between developer, sometimes landlord in a way, and certainly sponsor. So like these terms can be kind of used interchangeably. The easiest examples that I can give, first off, new construction, we typically use the term sponsor or developer.
Right.
And, or you could be looking at, and there's a lot of these, especially, and I mentioned in part one of these episodes, the Riverside Drive condominiums. Whereas these buildings are rent-controlled, rent-stabilized buildings that are converting to condo. Now, the ones that have already converted to condo and sold to an individual, those are resales. The ones that had rent-controlled, rent-stabilized tenants in it, no longer living there, that very often the sponsor will renovate those apartments and then sell it, and these are negotiated a little differently.
So sponsors like, new developments or new conversions?
Or it could even be an old conversion where...
Old conversion,
yeah,
yes.
So
exactly,
because like if you look at these old co-ops, not everyone bought their apartment when it was initially offered. Mm-hmm. So then a lot of them became rent-controlled and rent-stabilized apartments as a result. But what happens when those apartments eventually become vacant? Well, that's usually when they're converted by the sponsor into sponsor unit sales. Now, there's aspects of that, and like most of the time, sponsor units are really easy sales, where there's a fraction of the paperwork to be done.
No board application.
No board application.
No board review.
No board approval. No interview.
None of that.
Yeah. However, my first sale ever was a sponsor sale, and it required the board application and a board interview. Mm-hmm. The reason why, it was an HDFC where the board owned the unit. So in that case, that sponsor, which was the co-op board itself, wanted to go through the normal process channels. That was my first sale ever. So in any case,
they threw you in the water.
Yeah, so...
And you swam.
Yeah, and like that client still was referring clients to me, and still refers to me and the architect that she found as the dream team. So,
amazing.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
amazing.
So in any case, that kind of goes through those like closing cost aspects, but there's some other closing costs that come up with sponsor units that you don't typically see on a resale. But these are things that we are looking out for you on, and acknowledging that like these might be negotiable. So now the next topic over here, boards and board packages. We talked a little bit about this throughout the episode and part one. Sponsor sales rarely, if ever, require a buyer to complete a board package, except in my HDFC sale. But yeah, condos typically, and we mentioned this previously as well, condos typically only have the right of first refusal, but all paperwork requested must be completed in full, or they can reject until it's provided. So, for instance, if they have 10 different requirements, you might have to still provide 11 requirements, even though they only ask for 10, because the managing agent sometimes, they want what they want, and that's where
that's interesting you say that. In a lot of board packages, so you have to be really cognizant of this, they don't have the lead paint disclosure.
Yep.
And that is important to include. You have to make sure that lead paint is signed by both parties, the person, the seller and the buyer.
So on the lead paint disclosure, sometimes I get attorneys that add it into the contract.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I had one that did not.
Yeah, exactly. So
I said, where's the lead paint disclosure? Yeah.
So sometimes managing agents put it into the board package, sometimes attorneys put it into the contract, and sometimes nobody does anything, so it's our job. So because it's our job to make sure.
We're the last defense.
Yes, exactly.
So
have your eyes peeled.
So all these things like that, that come into play over here. But typical condos typically only have the right of first refusal, but we still have to fill out those board packages in the fall. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, having been on a board and actually implemented a board package in the first place, my building didn't initially have it, but I put it in place for a bunch of reasons that we might talk about in a whole separate episode. But they you have to do everything that they're asking for and then some. So they might not start that clock until you've completed everything they've asked for. So yeah, and yes, we've encountered managing agents that expect more than they're asking for.
Correct.
So
And they will send it back to you and say, please add this.
But it wasn't in the board package to begin with.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but we need it.
We need
you
it.
know.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So I've never had a board package sent back to me.
Me neither.
I have.
You
But
have?
one when I first started doing that once,
I have.
and I'm like, that will not happen again. So after
Now
that,
I've had them ask for additional things
Not
or
even.
additional clarifications.
Correct, yeah.
But I didn't have them basically reject it outright.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just asked for, oh, this is missing, or we want you to elaborate on this.
I don't even get that
And
because
so-
I elaborate. You know,
Yeah.
I do what they call there's a name for a letter, which I don't remember right now, but I just do a little cover letter of a synopsis of
Little summary page?
Yeah.
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 It's one of those strange things that we tend to encounter every once in a while, because I've had managing agents sometimes ask for things that were totally irrelevant,
Yep.
but they want what they want and they're not going to go away until you give it to them.
Correct.
I actually had one client that had never had any credit, and they asked for the social security number, and I gave it to them, and they were like upset, like they're like, give it to me again. They wanted to make sure it was right, and I said, what we gave you was absolutely verified. I've reviewed it, I've clarified. They still wanted me to give it to them again, and I said, what's wrong? And they're like, your client has no credit. I'm like, I'm aware, but this is a condo.
Yeah.
And like finally, she was insisting on it. Finally, I go back to the seller. I'm like, listen, my client has got no credit, so no credit report is coming up.
Correct.
And as a result, and I'm like, the managing agent is insisting on this, and we're stuck on this process.
Yeah.
And we had to get the seller involved and say, let it go.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, and I'll like move on. I'm like, if this person has no credit, like they
There's
told
nothing
you
we can
that,
do.
there's nothing more that you're going to get from this person.
Correct. Yeah.
So sometimes we get some silly things like that, unfortunately. And I understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, once I clarified, that should have been sufficient. But yeah, we tend to have some of those things. We talked a little bit about approval timeframes earlier in the first part. Condos but this is from the sales side.
The sales side.
This
Yeah,
is the sales side.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
So it's a
30 to
little
40
different,
days.
but
Yeah,
I think we covered it a little bit. But most condo bylaws require that they either exercise the right of first refusal or approve the purchaser package within 30 days. Or the board package is deemed complete. A few buildings, they might have 45 days, but it's all mentioned in the offering plan or its amendments on when that time frame is relevant. Co-ops are a little different. Co-ops, typically, they review the board package in about a month. And as you said, I'm like, sometimes like they might review it on a specific day of the month. You might
Or as needed.
or so it all depends on the timing over there. So every building could be different, especially considering that a lot of co-op boards, they don't meet in the summer, and you could be out of luck waiting for them to return from summer break. So board reviews sometimes could take months. So this is a big departure from anything else that you're going to find in the rest of the country.
And if there are any agents listening, in the audience, it would be good to have your seller, maybe coach your seller into be in good stead with the managing agents or the board. Get to know the board.
Never hurts.
Never hurts.
Never
hurts.
So co-ops, like we say, always, the co-ops tend to be different, and they can reject a buyer as long as it's not discriminatory, but they're not required to disclose why the buyer is rejected. That could potentially change based on the law that Denise mentioned. That's been being kicked around for a while, and I guess it's been refreshed over here.
I don't know the name of the law, but the one that's Westchester.
It's kicking around.
Yeah.
It's like some sort of transparency-based law. But here's a favorite topic of ours, and I'm sure most of us have dealt with if you've been in the business long enough. Co-op board can reject if they don't feel the price is sufficient.
I've dealt with that.
I've dealt with it too. So
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is like a common theme that we come with, and I'm just gonna put it out there. I don't hold back when I feel like there's something that needs to be called out. And this is one of those things. But this is, a topic that is totally not transparent to the market. And I don't know, maybe there's a possibility for an argument about price fixing, contained within this. A lot of times the way that these wind up working out is you're renegotiating at a higher price, but it's not a real higher price. Some of these things are packaged in a way that makes it look to the public as a higher price, but in reality, it could be something as simple as a renovation credit. Yep. But the apartment was just renovated. So,
right.
Or maybe, whatever the case may be, but like sometimes co-op boards will specifically, reject based on price. Sometimes you can get that reversed. Yep. Sometimes you can't. But sometimes these things are just totally manipulated. Yep. So this is one of those strange, quirky things that we tend to be dealing with. So they can also reject on buyer financials. As we mentioned, previously, there's multiple types of buyer financial qualifications that they go through, and I mentioned that in part one. There is an interview. Now, typically, I don't know about you guys, but I know and we were trained by the same director, so we probably have similar kind of viewpoints over there. But I know before my clients go up, before that interview board, I'm sitting down with them and prepping them.
Oh yeah, definitely.
1,000%.
1,000%. I send them interview guidelines.
Yeah.
And I say, and we'll go over point by point.
Yes.
Before the interview.
And we talk about their pillars that they should refer back to.
Even down to the way they dress.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All of that matters.
So I just very, very simply, what I will say for the board interview, it's not like a job interview.
Right.
The whole purpose behind it is, think about it. You're a volunteer on a co-op board, and a lot of times, you're very rarely are you ever paid for these jobs. So they're purely volunteer. Think about it. Do you want to let somebody into your building that is complaining right off the bat or is going to make problems for the building? I'm like, odds are that kind of interviewer or interviewee, they're not likely to get accepted through it. And a lot of times we will see those behaviors come out when we're taking those buyers out. And we'll know and say, I'm like, you know what? I'm like, you have to either tone this back and be prepared to tone it back during a board interview, or alternatively, you need to be looking at condos.
Condos are new development.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So the reality is, I'm like, this is an important sticking point, and like, ultimately they're looking to keep their lives reasonable and sane, and plus they don't want to let in like axe murderer types and psychopathic, whatever. But in any case, that's the whole premise behind the reason for the board interview. There is the less common scenario about the pet interview.
Yeah.
And we all know that there are some dogs that need to go through doggy tranquilizers,
Yes.
or through
Doggy
exercises,
training.
or
Doggy
exercises
training.
through the park before the interview. Wear them down. It's kind of a chaotic component, and not every board will even allow dogs into their buildings. So keep that in mind. There's all sorts of crazy other variables that we come across, but just most important to come across all these as a whole and how different it is.
Yeah, mentioning other variables reminded me of something. Just going back to the requirements for the board package. Make sure, and again, any agents that are listening, make sure that you read every personal reference letter. You read it. And also, most important, you read the introductory letter. Because I've gotten introductory letters from clients. I'm like, oh, no, we're taking that whole paragraph out.
Yep.
Yes.
Remove that.
Yeah.
That's not going to help you one bit.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So read everything. Don't just, forward. It's your job to make sure that you're presenting your client in the best light possible.
Absolutely. And for condos, you have these letters, but I mean, they're simply to get to know your neighbors, but it's not.
Still read them. Read everything.
Still read them. I had one client actually earlier this year. He absolutely insisted putting something into the letter, and that I was recommending it not be included. We found out later the board didn't even read them, but I mean, we're lucky in that instance.
Because some boards, they read everything.
Yeah.
Right. Now, since it was a condo purchase, it wouldn't have killed the sale.
No.
But
Co-op,
it certainly
yes.
would have made things a little bit more awkward if they had read through it. So certainly among those things.
And the managing, you know who reads?
The
managing agent
yes,
is
and
absolutely
they'll come back
reading.
and say, "But Denise, we need this because your client said this in the letter." I'm like, okay, let me get back to you.
Yeah, or the managing agent sometimes comes back and says, you know what, your letter is great, but because I know this board and I know what they're looking for, like, can you have something written about this?
Yeah. Right, yes. Some are nice that way. Others will say, I want this because this is what they said. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, sometimes in order to move this forward and not, that even the managing agent doesn't want to do this over and over again.
Exactly.
So, like, sometimes it's like, sometimes they got better things to do, exactly. And, like, it's just a matter of, like, they don't want to go through this over again. So sometimes they'll give you advice, but then you have managing agents that will give you no guidance.
And guys, also, it's so important. Whenever I deal with a managing agent, you have to be respectful. They're getting inundated by a lot of questions, a lot of nonsense questions. So be respectful, be nice. You know, hi, how was your day? Thank you so much. You know, just something to show that you stand out from the crowd.
You know what?
You are. Oh, I don't know. Oh, Denise, yeah, I remember you. Or Dom, I remember you. Yeah, stand out from the crowd always.
You know what? I'm going to add a pop culture reference to your example here. This weekend, I was rewatching a favorite of mine, Roadhouse, with Patrick Swayze. And at the beginning, he's taking over a new bar. And at the beginning, he's like, there are 3 rules to follow. And the most important one and the final rule to follow is be nice.
Be nice.
So yeah, it's like so whether it's bouncing in a hypothetical movie or managing agents, I'm like, the standard rule there is to just be nice.
They're humans too. They're human beings.
So I think that's kind of like an important aspect. When I start getting into other variables, now we're going to go back to not just like the board package, but and some of the due diligence, but we get within it an alteration package. So that brings up our next topic of renovations. And most condos and co-ops, they have specific rules on renovations. So for instance, and I'm going to introduce a new term here, most co-ops won't approve wet over dry renovations. So I'm sure you're probably wondering, dear listener, what is a wet over dry renovation? Meaning kitchens, bathrooms, washing machines. Like you can't
wet
put
bar.
Wet bar, anything that has a source of water is basically, you cannot put it over like somebody's bedroom, which is a dry space, or their living room. So, ultimately a lot of buildings, now maybe they might have it on the fringes of the living room or something like that. But, but in most cases, you cannot have wet over dry, is one of the key points in renovations. Now, plans in terms of renovating, they often need to be formal, even if it's a condo. They often need to be formal with an architect or an engineer's drawings if it's going to involve plumbing, electric, or moving or adding walls or taking down walls. Some buildings also have a minor alteration agreement for items just as simple as painting. Don't underestimate that. Just because you can paint your own apartment doesn't necessarily mean that like the co-op board doesn't require you to follow their rules. So this is so foreign of a concept to buyers outside of Manhattan. But in Manhattan, these things are normal and typical. Now, I can tell you from serving on a board, most of these rules come out of a result of something that went wrong somewhere along the line that the board felt compelled to make a rule. Yep. So, that's usually how these things wind up coming about. So co-ops, they can be a little bit more complicated. Some co-ops still abide by what we call summer rules. And, meaning that renovations are limited to just the summer months because, the old world New York, it was expected that in a lot of these old world co-ops that the wealthy left town for the summer and nobody would be in the building, and therefore it'd make renovations less disrupted to others. But within these, and you'll all find this all in the alteration agreement over here, some of these buildings have massive daily fines if the renovation isn't completed within their specific time frame. And it's typically like they might give you like 4 or 6 months or whatever the building might be, but those are, relatively common ones that we tend to see. So in condos, they tend to they can still be complicated, but they tend to be more liberal with all these kind of rules, and you don't have things like summer months, in some of these buildings. So I think that kind of gives you a reasonable idea on renovations. So now let's flip to the next topic: investors. We always get a lot of investors, and it's not the kind of investors that you tend to come across, at least the most part. I don't know, maybe your experiences might be different, but most of the investors that I've come across over the years, these are often not necessarily sophisticated and experienced real estate investors. They tend to be of the type of like, I've got money burning hole in my pocket. I've heard real estate is a good investment.
Exactly, yes.
And there's not necessarily a specific strategy in mind. And these tend to be more amateur one-off type of buyers.
Yeah.
But on occasion, we tend to we may get like more professional experienced investors. But I'd say if I was to estimate in my own experience, it's probably 80 to 90% like first-time real estate investors that don't necessarily have a strategy in mind. I help them to develop a strategy, but they just like, oh yeah, I want an apartment. So I'm like, yeah, I'm happy to help, and here's how I think I can help, and I break that down. But flipping is not really a big thing here.
No.
Not in recent years. Now, what I was seeing flipping prominent on for a little while, and I think that trend has kind of gone away for the most part, was townhouses, and because there's you only have to abide by like the city permitting process and what's permitted there. But you don't have condo or co-op rules and alteration agreements and things like that. But there was also this trend to make these old world townhouses into ultra luxury product. So that's one of the reasons why I was seeing flipping, and there was a big opportunity there. That has slowed quite significantly in the last few years. But
you're seeing that mostly in Harlem, right? Or
I've seen that all over the city, but more below Harlem than that. But yeah, I still think there's some opportunity. You have to get the property at the right price.
For it to make sense.
For it to make sense. But I don't see a whole lot of flippers come in. Also with co-ops, most co-ops are not open to investor purchases, let alone the flipping stuff. So, most co-ops, they want you to be a primary resident in order to be approved. Maybe a pied-à-terre in some instances, but a little less common than primary residences. Condos, it's possible to be a flipper there, but just keep in mind, it's still much more complicated than like single family homes. So yeah, it's possible, but we don't see as many of them. Investors, financing, that's another thing. No like 3% down scenarios that you can find in the whole country, and forget about all those hypey like infomercial type of scenarios. Typically, most banks are going to want to see anywhere from 30 to 50% down. But even if you're just talking from a practical cash flow perspective, odds are in order to see a reasonable amount of cash flow, more often than not, the numbers are going to probably work out where you're putting down at least 50%. So that tends to be the scenarios that I see. And for those that are a little bit more sophisticated than the average buyer, we talked about cap rates or capitalization rates. And, it tends to indicate like the higher the rate of return, generally speaking, the higher the rate of risk or the higher the risk levels. So, in New York City, we tend to be lower risk. You don't tend to see lots of foreclosures. You don't tend to see a lot of weather-related events. And usually, in most cases, even if somebody's selling at a loss, they usually put down such a high percentage down payment, we usually don't even see short sales. Foreclosures, forget about it. There's... I think
so you're saying the cap rate said you buy something on the Upper East Side. Right?
So on the Upper East Side, it's very low risk, and you might be looking at 2-3% cap rates. In Harlem, slightly higher, because it's less popular, overall for the overall buyer pool. So the cap rates tend to be a little bit higher.
So you're seeing 3% cap rate in the Upper East Side? You're saying?
That tends to be on the higher side, but yeah, I mean, and these numbers, actually, we have a tool that, that our firm provides for us where we can actually go and download the neighborhood cap rates. And just see as that updates live, so we don't have to manually calculate that on a regular basis. But yeah, Upper East Side is going to tend to be on the lower side, percentage-wise for the most part. Can you find an opportunity? Maybe. Every once in a while, things pop up. But I can tell you, one of the things that's going to cut into it and make it a little bit more complicated. A lot of buildings, they actually have fees associated with subletting. So these are some of the topics that we tend to get into with each of these topics over here. Now let's go into all the weird and strange things. Now, if you already didn't think that buying in Manhattan was weird and strange, this is all the other generic category type of stuff that we deal with over here. So we don't have an MLS, meaning that agents will be sending lists from a variety of platforms in most firms, most cases. But this could change, over time. But right now, that's where we're at. Basically, the whole rest of the country has an MLS in their area. We're one of the few that don't have it. And it was just simply a reason that the brokers that would be managing this whole process just couldn't agree. Nothing more complex than that. In most of the nation, you have what's known as a realtor. And
just trademarked.
Yeah, it's a trademark thing, and you have to be a member of the National Association of Realtors, or NAR for short. And very few agents in Manhattan, unless they're more often working outside the city, very few of us are members of the NAR. Now our firm might be, but just as a formalization. But as individual agents, most of us are not realtors.
So we can't call ourselves realtors.
Right.
Brokers, agents, yes, but not realtors.
Right, exactly. And like the NAR has made an entire campaign that if your broker is not a realtor, that they're not up to the same standards. The problem being is that Manhattan doesn't have NAR members for the most part, so that doesn't really hold true. Now, I'm not going to say that in a lot of markets that somebody that doesn't become a realtor that they're anything lesser, but there's an ethics standard, and we have that in our trade organization in New York City. So I think that is just something I wanted to point out, but usually not a big difference, but just in case you're expecting to find a realtor because of what's been drilled into you by the NAR, not typically the case here. But we're giving you, we have an entire episode of what to look for in a buyer's agent and your seller's agents as well. We talk about that.
Because they don't know. They refer to everyone as a realtor. Are you a realtor?
Right.
Are you a realtor? Because they don't know. I'm like, yeah.
And sometimes I'll even just say yes because it's just too confusing.
I just say yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Aren't you a realtor?
I don't put
I
that
have a friend who's a realtor.
Exactly. So I don't put that into writing. But the vocalization in order to keep the conversation flowing and simple. I might say that.
Yeah.
Home showing appointments. This is where we differ from just about everywhere else in the country. All the other agents over there, well, they have a simpler buyer-agent business there because what happens is if you're an agent, you're working with a buyer, a lot of times you can just schedule things. They have showing time. We have showing time, but it doesn't work as well here.
Does not work at all.
I stopped using it after about 2 weeks because I just found it doesn't work for us. And apparently Dom is agreeing there. And the reality is, I'm like, in the rest of the country, you got lock boxes to access, so you're not setting up an appointment. In our market, it's usually, in most cases, the listing broker is setting up the appointment. The buyer's agent oftentimes is optional. Now, I personally like to go with my clients at least the overwhelming majority of the times to the properties. But, a lot of times the listing agent might consider our attendance optional in that situation. Now, the case where that might be different is if it's a vacant apartment and it's a doorman building, and a lot of times, a lot of those agents, especially if it's, nothing to see or nothing special or something like that, they might just leave keys with the doorman, or alternatively, maybe they're out of town and they can't show. They'll leave keys with the doorman. But, that's a little bit more of a, common scenario over, with us in our market, is that, as agents, we're dealing with a lot more parties and scheduling showings. So just be a little bit more patient with us, just because, a lot of times, and even the showings themselves, let's say we're going to see 5 properties, sometimes we can't get them all in the appointment slots that we want. I know I'm looking at that map of all the appointments that I'm trying to set up, and I'm trying to make it as logical and reasonable and less walking.
It's hard. Scheduling appointments is one of the toughest part of our jobs.
Yeah.
Because the listing agents are not responding. The clients, they want what they want. Yeah. At the end, it usually works out, but yeah.
Now, I just want to clarify, that point too, is that a lot of the public, now as you're hearing from all the complexity here, a lot of the public thinks that a large portion of our jobs, like half of our jobs, they think it is scheduling showings and actually doing the showings. The reality, I don't know what your estimates would be, but I'd say probably that's about 15% of our true overall responsibilities. Now, it might take a lot of
10%,
time.
10%, even 10%.
10%?
I would
Okay.
say, yeah.
10 to 20%.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying 10 to 20, you're saying 10. I said, more along the lines of 15. So we're all in that same range, same ballpark. But it is definitely not 50%. And, you're now starting, as we go through all these points, you're starting to understand some of the nuance. We didn't even get to all the crazy pricing stuff.
Correct.
But that's a whole separate episode. But these are some of the things that we're dealing with. But in stricter co-ops, the listing agent might require the buyer or buyer's agent to provide either the buyer's revenue form, which I'm going to explain in a minute, or answer some questions about the buyer's fitness to purchase the apartment before they agree to show the home. So especially in these stricter, co-ops, a lot of times they want to see that revenue from that buyer. Now, the revenue, what that is revenue is our trade organization.
Real Estate Board
of New York. Right, exactly. Now, that's what we have instead of NAR. Now, what we refer to as the revenue financials, sometimes we just shorten it and say, supply us with your revenue. But the revenue financials are part balance sheet, part income statement. So basically the buyer is giving us all this personal information just to see the apartment sometimes. Now, it's good for us as agents to have early on in the process anyway. But sometimes you got a brand new buyer you're working with and say, oh, I want to go see this home, and say, you know what? The only way that the listing agent is going to show it to us is I need to see your financials first. So this is something to keep in mind, and this is part of a larger conversation.
Let me ask you guys too, with in tandem with that, do you ask a new buyer off the bat certain questions? Is this your first time buying, first apartment you're looking at, and have you been approved? Do you ask about the approval letter? Not a pre-qualified, but an approval.
I asked if you've been approved,
or
if you've reached out to a lender.
Right. Have you discussed first? Are you financing or cash? Right. Exactly.
And if they are financing, I do ask.
Yes.
It's just best to get that up front to see if they're qualified or what they're qualified for, because again, our time is valuable as well. Right. So we don't want to go out and show you 6 or 7 apartments and you aren't qualified for any of them.
And in tandem with that, what I like to know also, so they tell me, okay, Denise, my budget, including mortgage, is no more than $4,500. So I need to know, basically, with that approval letter, because that approval letter will sort of give you what your monthly is, your Correct. Monthly mortgage. So now I need to look for maintenance that's going to come all in costs.
Yep.
So that's why I need to see that also.
For sure.
So for me, I'm a little different than the way that you are approaching it, but in essence, it's based on more experience and the fact that my background has always been finance.
Did you just say more experience?
Okay, on financial experience, I should say. Elaborate on that. So a lot of times I'm picking up, a lot of clues beforehand, and the fact that not every building is going to. So a lot of times, a lot of buyers get the impression that, oh, I'm pre-approved or I'm pre-qualified, and they think like I can use this bank. So a lot of times I might not necessarily ask them, for that letter to show it to me. Simply because there's a good possibility they might not be going with this lender ultimately. Correct. Because that lender might not want to even approve the building. Forget about the client. Yeah. So I don't want to necessarily give them false impressions. So I'm going through their mind and I'm asking questions that are low-key probing a lot of times, and I'm figuring out myself in my head. I'm like, okay, I know that if they've got $4,500 a month number in their head, I'm like, I can do that back-end calculation. And I know one of our search tools allows you to, kind of factor in not the mortgage payment, but the monthlies, and only show us that. So if I know the mortgage is this, or if I know the monthlies are this, then their mortgage has to be, this. But usually I'm kind of probing them softly and getting that information without necessarily always having a letter in hand.
It's just, I can agree with that. It's just to have that additional information.
Exactly.
It never hurts.
It gives us a guesstimate.
Correct.
Of what. I'm not going to go through. It gives us a guesstimate of what.
I'll give you a prime example. Because the client can say, yeah, I want to spend $4,500.
Right.
And then you go and look, and they're like, you can't afford $4,500.
Exactly.
So they can say whatever they want.
Right.
And up until the point where they get that approval or that financial approval.
Yeah, and regardless if they use that lender or not, the numbers are not going to change that drastically.
Correct.
Right.
The numbers they don't have to use the lender, but the numbers are what the numbers are based.
And just for the
Exactly.
record, I've never ultimately had a client waste my time with my approach. So it's not as specific as yours, and your approach is absolutely. I'd categorize it as best practices. Whereas my approach, I wouldn't recommend for most people, most agents. It's just that
it works for you.
It works for me. Number
Yeah.
one, and number two, I've got a long career in finance before I ever wound up working in real estate. So for me, this approach works really well, and it also puts the clients often at ease because they don't feel like they're under pressure.
Correct.
But yeah, I would not recommend my approach for most agents. It's one of those things. It's there's a feel to things. Yeah. There's a rhythm to things.
It takes time and practice.
Yeah. So at the same time, I'm usually be able to pick up if they're not going to be able to qualify for this.
And you can sometimes tell in the conversation when you're asking certain questions.
Yeah.
You ask certain things about
some red flags pop up.
Yeah.
Like for instance, I took a client out, and case in point, I did not ask for a pre-approval. It was a lead source that came in, and so we're going out. We're looking at a few things. In my initial conversation, I said because I could hear she was a young lady, and I said. Will you be assisted by a guarantor, or are you doing this on your own? Oh, I can do it on my own. I'm like, okay. So I took her out, and in conversation, she thought based on her income, she could afford X amount. She made, I think $70,000 a year, and she wanted something, close to $6 million. I'm like,
nope.
So we had a whole conversation, and her face just dropped. Yeah. Because then that's what I did. I ran through the numbers. I said, you need deposit, your 20% deposit. How much do you have in savings? Yeah. Then your closing costs. So I ran through the closing costs, gave her a big estimate of what the closing costs. She went, oh, I didn't know this.
Correct. And a lot of times, based off that story, a lot of times when we ask these questions, we're not trying to
pry.
Right. We're
Yes.
really just trying to look out for your best
Exactly,
interest.
or to dissuade you from purchasing.
Correct. Yeah, so
You know,
we're
we're
really
not
just
going
trying to help you
right.
and
We're not
find
going
you
to
the right apartment.
Yeah, we're not going to put you in a hamster wheel,
Correct.
having you chasing your tail.
If
So
you're
we
making
need this.
$70,000 a year, as an example, from a lending perspective, usually the lenders don't want to lend more than like 3.5 times your earnings.
Right.
So like that and because they're looking co-op category over here, you're looking at probably something along the lines of $150,000, which barely ever exists in Manhattan. So
So when
so it's one of those things that you can quickly ascertain.
And I broke down the numbers for her right there and then, and she goes, "Oh, I didn't know this."
Yeah.
So going back to our list of quirky stuff over here, some buildings, they actually do not permit open houses, and they require buyers and their agents to be escorted throughout the building. And that's because the owners value their privacy.
Yeah.
A lot of times this is Manhattan. There are a lot of very wealthy people in this town. There are a lot of people that are very powerful, and there's a lot of very famous people in this town. So
And in addition to that, Adam, don't mean to cut you. In addition to that, for me, it's a safety thing. I want to meet the client in the lobby. I don't want to, if I have an open house, first of all, it's by appointment.
Right.
And I'm not sitting in the apartment. I'm sitting in the lobby because I want to meet every person that comes in. So, I say to the agent, to the doorman, if I'm in the apartment, do not send them up. Please have them sit in the lobby. I'll come down and meet them and escort them. For me, as a safety precaution too.
Yeah, agent safety is something that we don't often discuss, but it's an absolute very important thing. All right, so we're getting close to the end of the episode. We still have a whole lot more to cover. House rules. So a lot of times, now I do know that in other states you can find stuff about pets, but here it gets even a little bit more complicated. But every building has different rules around pets. Most condos are relatively liberal in allowing cats and dogs, but a lot of co-ops might not permit dogs and or have size or weight limits, and they might require, as we mentioned earlier, they might require the dog to be interviewed. By the co-op board members. So I guess they want to see if the dog is really rambunctious or is trained, and so all sorts of things that we go through. But yes, dogs have been known to have been tranquilized before these interviews.
Yeah.
And then you might have a dog lover on the board, you might not. So it all depends on how these things are sometimes handled. Purchase structures. So within the house rules. So, are parents allowed to buy for their adult children? Are they allowed to gift substantial amount of the value of the home? Can you buy as an LLC? Can you live in it as a pied-à-terre, meaning a secondary residence? These are all things that, that come up in our conversations regularly. And even financing structures within co-ops. Some co-ops are actually stricter with all cash purchases, and that can be viewed as a negative to the board. Even though it's viewed as a positive to the seller, the board might not view it that way. Why is that? So the real underlying reason for it is, and I know you guys have done some board packages for co-ops before. There is
many.
I'm sorry?
Quite a few.
Quite a few.
Quite a few.
And what is unique about a co-op board purchase? What paperwork forms you only find in co-ops? I forgot the name of it offhand, but there's these forms from the bank that they send you 3 original copies.
The Aztecs agreement.
Okay.
The Aztecs agreement.
So
I didn't know you were talking about the financial
Yeah,
aspect of it.
I couldn't think of the name at the moment, but
yeah.
it was eluding me. But Aztecs, so what that does is the Aztec basically is saying that when somebody's financing in a co-op, it basically says, I'm like, if this person defaults, the bank is now on the hook for it. So in a co-op, if you're buying all cash, there's no intermediary there. Now the co-op is now responsible for it. So a lot of times co-ops view all cash buyers as a negative because there's no intermediary there.
But that's why they want sometimes 2 years in liquid.
Right.
Post-closing.
Yeah.
So if they lose their job or something, they know that this money's in place.
Now,
And sometimes they ask to hold that 2-year liquid in escrow.
Yeah.
In escrow.
Yeah,
So it's not touched.
And sometimes it doesn't all make sense anyway, because I've had a client that had 9 years worth of post-closing liquidity. They were buying all cash, and they were rejected.
Ooh.
As far as I'm concerned, they were perfect candidates too.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a whole nother story. But things that we tend to get as a result of all this. But there could be, to your point over here, is that what if there's, the owner passes away, and then the estate is being fought over by the families.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, if there's a bank as an intermediary, they can ensure they get paid somehow, some way. Now, granted, there's all sorts of rules, and in selling it, granted, the co-op is first in the first lien position. And you're getting a lot more technical than a first, a buyer needs to know at this point. But it comes down to is what else can or can't be done in a co-op. Adjustable rate mortgages. A lot of co-op boards do not want to see adjustable rate mortgages. They want to see fixed rate. Trust structures are often not permitted. Now, the buildings that might permit a trust is they might have to amend the trust to allow for the co-op to be included within the structure of the trust legally. So, on to our next topic of offers, due diligence, and inspections. So I mentioned earlier, offers are not binding, and buyers are free to make multiple offers at once. All cash offers are extremely common in Manhattan, so it doesn't necessarily mean that a buyer will get a discount. We talked a little bit about that earlier. Valuation of an offer. There's lots of variables when submitting offers, a topic of an entire episode on its own, but a few quick factors just to give you a sense. There's neighborhood, there's the block, there's the building itself, the floor number, window, the view, the exposures, the apartment condition, the amenities of the building, and I'm sure there's probably a whole bunch more. But we are trying to keep this, on the briefer side. Pricing trends, they change often, but historically we see an apartment well priced. Most negotiations tend to be about 2 to 3% below asking price, or sometimes just the asking price. But that, of course, assumes that it's priced right. Not always, but more often than not, we encounter that. Offer submissions, we mentioned that they are not binding. Offers should be in writing and well structured, typically leaving no ambiguity. I've had, when I represent buyers, I've had listing brokers come back and tell me, I'm like, this is the most detailed offer we've ever gotten. And I'm sure, you guys have learned from the same managing broker as I do, so you probably may have heard the same comment as well. So, but how we present an offer, I think that's part art and part science, and I think that is an important aspect of getting an offer taken seriously versus it not being taken seriously. Winning a bidding war versus not winning a bidding war. And a bidding war, especially in a co-op, it doesn't have to be the highest price in a bidding war.
That's true.
You can have a better offer that is not the highest price and win. And I've had that in a few cases. Due diligence. So all Manhattan sales involve attorneys on both sides of the sale. While townhouse sales, which are typically less than 2% of sales, we talked about that earlier, the process is not substantially different than a home sale, in the whole rest of the nation, other than the attorney involvement. For condos and co-ops, there's significant due diligence process, which we talked about earlier. And inspections, we also talked about earlier. So, a lot of times the attorney due diligence will wind up covering all these various aspects of the inspection. But we have covered, I think, is pretty comprehensive.
There's one thing that we didn't touch on. I want to just go back really quick on this offer submission, and that's contingencies. And I think that's very important in terms of just when you're submitting an offer and part of the offer that sometimes gets overlooked. And there's typically like 2 or 3 contingencies that are most common is the financing contingency. That's either if you're going to be financing or if you're going to do it all cash. And the other one I've seen in more of the townhouse deals is like an inspection contingency.
Right.
And that comes into play again when we're talking about either bidding wars, where some people will agree to waive all contingencies, and so forth. So do you want to touch a little bit more about
Yeah, I mean, like the one other thing that came about, especially after the failure of First Republic, there was also another kind of bank contingency over there. It was that the concern was, and I think the issue has dissipated now, but who knows, it might pop up back at another point in time. But there was a contingency that we were putting up in case the bank that has agreed to finance winds up falling through because the failure of the bank or something of that nature. So I was putting that in, and most of the listing brokers were questioning, like, what is this? Yeah, I've never seen this before. And I said, this came about all after the failure of First Republic. And I'm sure it probably happened in like 2009, 2010, the brokers that hadn't lived through that period. I was in the finance world back then, so I wasn't on the real estate side, so I wasn't seeing it. But I'm guessing that was probably the component. But contingencies. It's like a lot of times, a lot of brokers are of the opinion, because Manhattan is such a wealthy market. A lot of times they'll if they don't see it, they just assume that it's not financing contingent. I'd say it's smarter to not let anybody guess and put it in there into that offer.
For sure. Yeah.
So there you go. I mean, we covered we covered a tremendous amount of material.
I hope we didn't overload your brain.
Yeah, I mean, but
great information.
But I think now the buyer that's coming in and now saying, I'm like, why is Manhattan different? And I attempt to explain it, and they only have 20 minutes to listen. I think this podcast episode is really great because it's saying, listen, I can only get you on the phone during these hours, whereas on the podcast, you now have our knowledge, contained and it's on demand. So you can kind of pull this all up. But now, like, by listening to this 2-part episode, you can get a better understanding of what we as agents wind up having these common conversations with our clients and saying, listen, everything you know about real estate purchases, at least half of it, throw it out the window.
Correct.
Right, exactly. Yes.
So it's kind of like we're always trying to convince our clients like just how different it is. Well, I think we outlined at least the overwhelming majority. I'm sure there's points we didn't even catch or touch on, but I think this is way bountiful in terms of being able to understand just how dramatically different this is. Well, I think we've covered it all, and I think we're ready to break, and I'm sure you guys are all tired of listening to this because this is...
No, I never get tired of listening
to for this duration of an episode. I also try and keep most of my episodes a lot shorter than this, but all right, great. Thank you so much for listening. Again, hit the like button, share with your friends, let everyone about, talk about the Harlem Stories podcast. And rate and review us too.
Please do, yes.
Yeah.
Hit that like button.
Yeah, we're now on also on YouTube. I've added a YouTube channel for us. So I think definitely you can find us on Apple Podcast, Spotify. But I can tell you most of our listeners are listening to us on Apple Podcasts. But we should be on the overwhelming majority of podcast platforms.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.